Arteta! What a strike! What a screamer! Zola! And a fantastic goal! Arsenal back in it! And here's Limpar, lines it up, finds the net. Arsenal are in front.
Let's face it, art and entertainment are subjective. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Some people prefer the Mona Lisa. Some people prefer looking at dog poo on the sidewalk. What you prefer is your business, and I'll let you decide which the game on Sunday was. This is the Arsenal Vision Post-Match Podcast. My name is Elliot Smith. You can block me on Twitter, Yankee Gunner. Hey, it's a win. It's a win, and I am reliably told that when we win, we can only be happy, so I am so happy. Can you hear it? I'm happy. I'm happy. I am happy. I'm happy we won. I'm happy we're third. I think Manchester City are going to feel us breathing down their neck. We are going to 10 shots for, 15 shots allowed our way to the title this season. I can feel it happening. All kidding aside, an interesting game to discuss because positive outcome, maybe not positive process, and I think that's something that we're going to be chewing on over the 2 weeks of the international break. But you know what? It's better than chewing on a 3-0 loss to Brighton. It's better than chewing on a 1-0 loss at Newcastle. And we will be talking about that on the Schadenfreude podcast. Sorry, Schadenfreude podcast tomorrow on the Patreon. So if you want to sign up for that, we would love to have you there. Scottish Dave will be on that, as well as I'm hoping Paul, but I haven't asked him yet, so we'll find out. But he's here, so I can ask him. He's on Twitter at Pausing in My Pants. Hello, Paz.
Woohoo!
Will you be on the Schadenfreude pod?
I think I probably will.
Delightful. Tim's on Twitter at Stoberto. Hello, Tim.
Hello.
Clive's on Twitter at ClivePAFC. Hello, Clive.
Hello.
We love our friends at The Athletic, and you can sign up there at theathletic.com/Arsenal Vision, get the 50% off and all that. But we are very, very excited. Probably the biggest company I've ever worked with, the Black River Conglomerate Industries, got in touch, and they want us to promote the Shmew. We did all this stuff with the lawyers. It was quite extensive, but we are happy to have the Shmew on as a sponsor. You'll be hearing about them down the line, but you can always go to theshmew.com, and of course it is the SHMEW, the Shmew.com. Just to be clear, that's not the Shmew, SCHMOO. They were pretty clear that I should delineate that. So the Shmew, SCHMOO, not them. It's the Shmew, the SHMEW.com. So just want to clarify that. We'll have an ad for that for you down the line, but very, very excited to be working with Black River Conglomerate Industries. So there you go. In any event, let's get started. And Paul, I will start with you for a second. I want to just get your take on the way we should analyze the game. We'll talk lineup, we'll talk the events in the game, but I think one of the things that people are struggling with is the cognitive dissonance of recognizing that maybe we are not playing particularly well in the Premier League while looking at the table, and it's giving us this signal that we are being rewarded for that. And I think back to Project 24 last season when all the XG nerds, the stat nerds with their slide rules were telling us regression is coming, and people were like, nah, it's a new coach, he'll get better, things will get better, and it didn't get better. And in fact, the way we finished the season was more indicative of what we were doing at that time. But having said that, we're back in the same position because, well, Bellerin's coming back, and Tierney's coming back, and Holding's coming back, and Lacazette's coming back, so there's cause for optimism. So for you, how do you weigh the excitement of our league position and victory versus the sort of dour standard of the football in the league?
Well, it's impossible to reconcile the two. It just a correlation, causation, I don't know, but they seem to have diverged here. I don't think anybody thinks our performances are great or good enough. And I kind of feel like we're holding on until something improves here. But weirdly, if you average 2 points per game across the season, you're probably going to be okay for top four. So we're just a point shy of that, I think. I think we're on 15 versus 16 to get there. But it just doesn't feel sustainable, doesn't feel good. This is a microcosm of our season so far. We're at home against Bournemouth. They don't really show up in the first half. On the other hand, in the first half, we're pressing hard. If you look at the stats and if you watch the game, you can see we're deliberately pressing in the first half. And it's another game in which we kind of tire in the second half or take our foot off the gas and the opposition wakes up a little bit. We've seen a few of those games. So there's some recurring patterns that we've seen across games, but there are some minor elements of style that are common, like when we play at home, we press quite ferociously on a relative basis. We're one of the most pressing teams in the league at home, and we don't bother pressing away from home. But we haven't really hit on any other kind of secret sauce. We've thrown away the playing from the back. I don't think we're any. I guess what we've learned is I have a little sympathy for the manager for the playing out from the back. Apart from the fact that I like the idea, it's also a new rule that moved what you could do out from the back, and it was an experimental phase that we maybe weren't best geared up to take advantage of.
Yeah.
So you can see a number of elements that could have disrupted our style for a manager who plays quite differently away from home and at home, and doesn't have a particularly religious
adherence
mm-hmm. or attraction to having a specific kind of style.
Yeah.
And it's all kind of turned into a mishmash, and we're all hoping our fingers that flying wing backs make all the difference when they kick in, but we're not very good.
Yeah, I think, Paul, last season our route to goal was back three, wing backs overlapping, and crosses and cutbacks. And this season, I think we're just trying to give it to the wide forwards and have them beat a man and create something. I think there's a lot of sort of hero ball being played with Saka and Pepe. I mean, Pepe was basically our ball progression in this game. Chambers did a bit of it. Kolasinac did almost none of it. And it is tough, right? We did win, and I think the first half was reasonably okay. But if you look at Manchester United, for example, Manchester United created almost nothing on XG and had hardly any shots against Newcastle. And anyone who watched that game would say, wow, they are really timid and tame. The irony is, if not for the offside, off-the-post shot that Oba had at the end that counts towards XG because it wasn't flagged for offside but would have been had it gone in, we had less XG and the same amount of shots as that Man U team at home to Bournemouth. So clearly there is a disconnect there.
And then if you add in the XG for their opportunity where they ran to the keeper, which didn't get any XG because they didn't have a shot. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That was better than 50-50. At that stage, they pulled ahead of us on XG. But there's always the game state.
Of course. Yeah, by the way.
The second half. But it's not pretty.
My point was more the sort of toothlessness of our attack more than to suggest that we didn't deserve to win the game. But
Tim, shots on target, wasn't it?
2 shots on target. Yeah, Tim, I think you can't help but come back to the midfield as a locus of an issue. And it seems harsh to keep pointing to Granit Xhaka, but the reason you wind up pointing to him is because he's the sort of point of difference between the league lineups and the cup performances, which have been so good. The one thing I'll say, though, is I'm not sure if it's the personnel, but the way we're doing it. That sort of flat three where the outside midfielders get really wide is creating a bizarre sort of pattern of play on and off the ball. Whereas in midweek, we had much more of a traditional double pivot with a 10 in front of that in Willock. This week, we sort of went back to that flatter three where Guendouzi and Ceballos were getting real wide at times, and Xhaka was sort of mopping up the whole center of the pitch. So for you, is the emphasis on selection maybe misstated, and it's really more about what we're trying to do with that midfield in the league?
Yeah, I definitely do. So I think at times like this, it's good kind of critical discipline to flip the question on yourself sometimes. And
I usually just answer the question when I'm asking it, but to each their own.
So I think like flipping the question in terms of, because, some of us more than others are a bit anxious and thinking, this is wrong and this is wrong. So sometimes you flip the question and say, what's going right? What are you happy with? What do you have almost no questions about? And I'm looking at the moment and I think I'm fine with Leno. I don't really have any problem with him at the moment. And then Aubameyang. Who doesn't like get involved in the play anyway. He's the one who finishes it, and then the rest of it, you're going the defense, not really. The fullbacks, the midfield, Pepe. It's there's a massive space between Leno and Aubameyang, and none of it's quite working, and I think you're quite right, and I feel bad doing this because I don't mean this like personally to Xhaka, because I think he's being hung out to dry in many respects. But you're right, to accommodate Xhaka or what we're doing is affecting so many other players. So you're right, like the central midfielders, they're so wide, and then like we get the ball to Pepe and he's surrounded by 4 players and we're not supporting him. And it's because we've got a choice between 2 right backs at the moment. We've got Maitland-Niles, who has the athleticism to support him going forward, but doesn't have fully developed defensive instincts because he's not a defender. Excuse me. We've got Callum Chambers, who made a number of really, really good defensive interceptions in this game, some game-saving ones actually under his own crossbar. And because he's a centre back, right? But he doesn't have the athleticism to get up and down and overlap. He often arrives quite late, which sometimes works quite well when we switch the ball. And he gets. We've had that kind of move a few times where you switch it and he gets there on the volley because, he's chugging up about 10 seconds later than everybody else to the attack. Which is not to criticise him. That's not who he is. And I think he's playing well. With the kind of tools he has, but he's not really an attacking right back. He's a centre back, right?
And yet, weirdly, Tim, in this game, he was our most attacking full back, which I think is part of our dysfunction, and it's probably something to do with Saka.
I think he had 3 shots or something. I think he had the most shots of anyone in the team.
Yeah, and actually, one of those was the kind of mishit volley. One was just because honestly he was knackered and didn't know what else to do, so he just walloped one over the bar. But I mean, if you want to talk about a lack of athleticism, then Sead Kolasinac is the picture in the didictionary, to be quite honest. So, and I do have some sympathy for Emery there, because what the hell else can he do in those positions? Really, he doesn't have an awful lot of choice there at the moment. But I think you're right. I think a lot of the roads point to midfield, and you look at Ceballos against Liège, and then you look at Ceballos in this game. I don't think that's down to like intensity or anything. I don't know. Bournemouth did pick up the intensity a lot in the second half, but I didn't look at this game and think, oh, this is a frantically paced Premier League game. This is different. To me, it was just because Ceballos was in slightly different positions, and his game was, I thought, quite inconsistent. There was lots of good stuff and quite a lot of bad stuff as well, and he got frustrated, and he was, I think, too far over to the left when we could have done with him a bit more central, and he's miles away from Pepe as well on the other side of the pitch, who just hasn't got any support at all. And it's the phrase I keep coming back to at the moment is just the blanket's not big enough. Because whatever we try, we either pull it up under our chins and leave our feet freezing cold, or pull it down over our feet and leave our midriffs bare. It's just Emery just can't seem to get that formula right, and I have some sympathy with him for that. But then there are some things like the continued, we absolutely cannot play without Granit Xhaka, that I just don't get.
It feels a bit obstinate, and I mean, it almost feels like he's trying to prove a point, because the louder people shout for him not to be included, the more it feels like he's entrenched. But I can't help but look at the way we are playing. I think some of Emery's comments are interesting. What's so weird is sometimes the things Emery says he wants from the team are things that you find yourself agreeing with, but just not seeing on the pitch, and it certainly doesn't look like the instruction, which makes you wonder if the message is getting through and maybe being ignored. I don't know what the case is there, but Clive, I do think that we can look at this game by halves, and if we look in the first half, we certainly tried to press more, and I think what that did at a minimum is it kept Bournemouth out of our half. We didn't come under the kind of pressure that we have in other games, which was good, but I think a lot of the creativity has been left, much like I mentioned, it was down to the wing backs last season. I think a lot of it was left to the wide forwards, and Pepe in particular had a lot of ball progression responsibility in the first half, and kind of beat a man and see what you can do. So for you, putting the defending part of the game aside, and even the second half and the timidity of the second half aside, it wasn't much of a spectacle. Where is the breakdown happening for you in the way we build play?
Yeah, I think I always walk away with something in these games, and the thing I walked away with from this game was our lack of connectivity. So what drives connectivity? So it could be a number of things. It could be spaces, could be distances. In the first half, we were much higher up in defence and we were pressing a lot more. So our connectivity came from just being closer together and having the available pass was on. So we looked better. That first half, maybe the first half of the first half, reminded me in a less frenzied way of the Spurs second half and the Aston Villa second half. Common denominator, defence pushed up, pressure on the ball from the front, distance is small, we get a semblance of some connectivity and transition. I sort of recognise that. I like it. I don't love it, but I recognise it, and it's the basis of a style. The issue is that we can't seem to sustain it, and it was understandable. Martin Keown did a great bit on Aubameyang on Match of Day 2, and I thought it was quite astute where he sort of highlighted Aubameyang was pressing in the first half, and we went off his trigger. In the second half, he didn't have the same energy. So what happens when you don't put pressure on the ball? Your defenders drop off. When the team becomes more stretched, what do? You have bigger distances. Then you go into what I call a Premiership game where every Premiership team can run. Most of them can run better than us. So suddenly we go from a compressed small distance game, which we are quite good at, where we're pressing, to one where the pitches become bigger and we're now in a track meet. And everyone knows you get asked in a track meet, you got a chance to get us running backwards. And that's what happened in the second half. The centre halves are taught, no pressure on the ball, drop. You must stop the ball over the top. The more we dropped, the more the defenders dropped. And I think there's and by the way, more our centre midfielders dropped as well. So we became very compressed, and then we get into what I call our lack of engagement issue. And this is where we start to concede shots and crosses. And I thought we defended our box really, really well. However, what's happening is maybe I think in the player's mind there's a subconscious reaction to the fact that a couple of weeks ago we had conceded the most shots in the top 5 leagues in Europe. So there must be a reaction to that from within the club, within the coaching staff. And there seems to be a level of resilience growing in the team since then. But I think at a cost of confidence offensively, positioning. When we go deep too quickly, we're pushed back too quickly. But I think we're trying to barricade and stop shots and really defend our box and really be a little bit more protective of our goal to try to change that scenario. Because if we keep conceding shots on the level that we were, it's not going to be a great April, May for us next year, right? So I think we're seeing that reaction. So what's that? So in some ways, there's cause and effect. We see the midfield being stretched, and then we focus on the one or two players that maybe can't handle that physically. Ceballos is one when he's in a running match, and Xhaka is the other. So our eyes immediately go to that. What Emery then does is react to the game that's in front of him. And so he adds runners to a running scenario where I would like to see a lot more bravery, a lot more pressing, sustained pressing if possible, and a higher line to squeeze the space and make it a more technical game which suits the players that we have. So what Emery does is he brings on runners. So he brings on Martinelli, he brings on Willock, and he keeps Hack on as long as possible. And he says, okay, I'm now going to run with you. I'm going to out-energy you. But it doesn't build the confidence. It doesn't allow us to take over the game. And that's when people start to question the style. And the style is questioned because we are now reacting to a small club like Bournemouth at home. And that's a valid criticism. So that's where we are, Elliot, I think, at the moment. I think we can't sustain more than one half of good play, and this has been a theme for maybe almost all of Emery's tenure. It's been we throw away halves and we just can't sustain it, and I think that's something that we need to think about going forward, because there's a basis of a style there, but we can't keep it going.
Yeah, and I think, look, ultimately, it's just as simple as wanting to find a way to create more chances and break down defenses, and we're struggling to do that right now. I think you can look at the first half as competent. I think Bournemouth were terrible, but sometimes teams are terrible because you make them terrible. They were very committed to playing out from the back, much like we had been, and they didn't do much better than we had been doing. So I think that plays a role. But Paul, I think it is a situation where I think also this team maybe has an instinct to play on the counter, maybe has an instruction to play on the counter, and when we get a lead, that is what we want to do. So we did take a lead thanks to Pepe, getting the assist. He did get an assist. I think we should point that out because he's going to come into for some criticism with his end product, but he gets the assist from the corner kick. David Luiz with a really nice header. Clive, you had one last point to make before we turn it over to Paul?
Oh, sorry, mate. I just wanted to say on connectivity, we have lost a couple of good connectors in the Iwobi and Mkhitaryan, ball carriers that really drive. And I think we miss those people that bring the ball to the front men. And I think Lacazette's another connector. And I think I walk away thinking about this lack of connectivity.
Yeah.
And where's it going to come from going forward? I think Lacazette is obviously an option to join and glue this together. We're hoping that the fullbacks come along and squeeze in our centre mids into the centre of the pitch. But I have a slight concern about where else the connectivity and progression in the last third is going to come from to set our superstar.
Yeah, I would agree. Look, I mean, I think it's really interesting. If you have access to the Stat Zone app, you can look at final third passes, and there's just a big blank space at the top of the 18 center of the pitch. There's no one passing through that area, into that area, through balls from that area. We are doing nothing in that area. That's an area Lacazette can occupy.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think that is?
Well, because Aubameyang wants to go in behind. Certainly, that's part of it. I think the other part of it is that we don't necessarily have a midfielder who is stepping into that role. Ceballos maybe was tasked with doing it and didn't. I know that we did more of it.
Ceballos always swings left. I mean, he just
does. And Guendouzi was pushed out to the right. So yep. Paul, I mean, we get the goal, and that's wonderful. Do you think that the instruction is to play more on the counter with a lead? I mean, do you think that explains what we're doing, to just shore things up defensively and try to play more reactive football?
Yes-ish. I think we're quite like Leicester at times, not just away from home. We actually match Leicester in terms of our pressing numbers when we play at home, which is quite interesting. There are certain things going on there that are quite Leicester-ish. And we've obviously seen games in which we pretty much set up to play a bit like Leicester. But even at home, there's an aspect of that where, when you, as you said, there's a divergence between what Emery says he's trying to do and what we see on the pitch. And I think part of it is a little bit of a misunderstanding. He talks about possession, but he more talks about control. And although sometimes that sounds like the same thing when he's talking, I don't think for him it's exactly the same thing. Control is the sense that we're not under threat. It's not necessarily that we have the ball. And control for him certainly involve. He talks about transitions. He talks about that style of a game, and I think the more you try and read between the lines, the more you see what's going on the pitch, which is we have two different kinds of style of play, and it almost feels like 2/3 of the time we're more about control in terms of being out of possession and keeping our shape, being more passive in second halves of games where it's getting away from us. So he doesn't like that middle ground of where we're pressing. If we take the Bournemouth example, we're pressing heavily in the first half. We don't kind of press in the second half. We don't press at all. So he doesn't like that middle ground. He'll drop back. We'll be much more passive, much more responsive. And there's not much in the middle, which maybe that makes sense if you're trying to keep your shape. But that's why we get this variation between home and away, but also within games, as Clive talked about, where the energy levels drop off in that second half. But I think he looks at Aubameyang and Pepe, and maybe even Saka to some degree, and he sets up in a way where connectivity in the middle of the field isn't what he's about. He's trying to move it from the back to the front. We still put a high number of final third passes together somehow, like up with the league leaders, like your Liverpools and Cities. We have a lot of passes in the final third, and we have a lot of passes in our defensive third. And given that we don't have huge pass numbers compared to other teams, it's the middle where the connectivity goes away. So we are transitioning between, not just in our away games, but in our home games. There's a big emphasis on transition, and then coming back the other way, we see our competitor doing to some degree doing the same thing to us, transitioning quickly through the midfield and into our attack. So the midfield, we're used in the Wenger years to having the midfield being this battlefield where we take on, our strength of midfield takes on the other guys, and that seems to be the area we've hollowed out a bit.
Yeah, and I think, look, one thing that we don't have is long periods of possession, long passing sequences. And I think sometimes if you want to find holes in a defense as they get pushed back, you hold the ball. And look, nobody likes that crab passing, that U around the box that doesn't go anywhere. But sometimes by moving the ball back and forth in the attacking third, you create a lane for a runner like Aubameyang to run into, and then someone's someone's got to play that ball. We tend to overload both wings. Now I agree with Clive that a big issue is distances. I could give you 10 screenshots from this game where Pepe had the ball on the right wing or Chambers had the ball on the right wing, and there's nobody to play it to. Ironically, the goal comes from a corner after Chambers has the ball on the right wing. There's 3 Arsenal players in the box against 6 defenders, and nobody even in the camera shot. So, I think that is a big issue. Paul, one more point on that?
Yeah, so I think a particular flaw with this game where, we've had strength on both wings, getting to the byline or creating on one side or the other, having overlaps. And now in the Bournemouth, in this phase of our season right now, and I think it's a short-term problem, we've got Chambers as our more attacking fullback, which is kind of weird. But him and Pepe are kind of struggling to find a relationship there because Chambers isn't really a charge past his winger kind of guy. He's doing his best, and yet the connector for that should really be Ceballos, but he's on the other wing. And then on the other wing, you got Kolasinac sitting back because he's being a little bit more defensively secure. And you got Saka, who's not an inverted winger. He wants to go outside. And so I think in this particular game in particular, our preferred way of attacking was just a little dysfunctional, and it's just because of the profiles of the players. And you would imagine with overlapping fullbacks and with inverted wingers, if we'd set up with Nelson there, if we had Bellerin bombing forward on the right-hand side, or even Maitland-Niles from an attacking standpoint, it would have looked a lot better and a lot more balanced.
Yeah, all right, well, that's fair. Look, Tim, I think we should get to some of the individual performances here because let's face it, right? We do a podcast where we break down every single match. And so you want to make it sound like there's interesting stuff to discuss. And I'm just not sure there's that much interesting about this game. Like, you could just say, that's our podcast. We won it 1-0. Wasn't pretty. We'll talk to you next week. Like, you could do that. I don't think that would be fair to anybody listening and hoping to hear something interesting. So let's try to get to some interesting analysis of individual performances if possible. And I think since we should do something positive, given that this was a win, let's talk about Callum Chambers. Here's a player whose Arsenal career looked like it was hanging by a thread. Went and played for a relegated team and was their player of the season. Came back, didn't seem to have a path to playing time. No one's convinced he's a center back. Maitland-Niles looked like he had a lock on the fullback position until Bellerin was back at least. And football changes things. And Chambers came in, got a chance to impress, got a chance to take over from Maitland-Niles, who was struggling. And he's arguably the man of the match in this game. Now, no one thinks he's a fullback. We've all already said that in the 27 minutes we've been talking. I don't think anybody thinks he should necessarily keep his place when Bellerin is back, but he deserves credit for this performance. I'm curious to get your take on sort of the resurrection of Callum Chambers and what role he could play in the future, if any.
Yeah, so the surprise for me is that it's a resurrection. Because I've always liked Chambers, and that doesn't mean that I think he's the next Tony Adams or Bakary Sagna or anything like that. But I've always liked him. I've always seen him as a good guy to have in the squad. Not least because of his versatility. But I really can't think of too many times where I feel like he's really let us down. There are certain games sometimes that just really stick for one reason or another, really stick in the collective imagination, and they can crucify you or they can make you. Sometimes players are quite average, but they have one or two big standout performances, and that's what everyone remembers. I kind of think that about Abu Diaby, and some of that's
Liverpool.
Context, for example. Yeah, some of that's context because he was very unfortunate with his career, but there were a lot of average and really poor performances, but there were some amazing ones as well. And I thought this about Arshavin. I thought Arshavin was completely underwhelming for the majority of his time at Arsenal, but there are one or two moments that just stick in people's heads. And then sometimes you get it the other way around, So Gervinho, I think Gervinho and Arshavin, pretty similar Arsenal careers, but Arshavin is characterised by scoring that goal against Barcelona. Gervinho is characterised by that miss against Bradford. And actually, I don't think there's a lot of difference between what they actually produced in their Arsenal careers.
Well, 4 goals against Liverpool too. Let's not forget that.
Yeah. But at least 2 of the 4 we conceded that night were completely his fault as well. Poor Kieran Gibbs that night was just like, that old saying, like not waving, drowning. And for Callum Chambers, it's the Montero thing against Swansea just stuck in everyone's minds, maybe because it was on a Sunday and it was on TV. It was the only game on TV that day, blah, blah, blah. And that seemed to really, really count against him. And don't get me wrong, I think we found out that day and subsequently that he's not really a fullback, but that doesn't mean that he can't ever, ever, ever play there again. And I was always surprised at the speed with which we kind of came to that judgment. And the thing, so with Chambers, I've always felt that he's been pretty solid. And I've always felt that he's someone, not just who can be a squad player, but who can push. And I think what will be really interesting for him is whether he can nudge out one of Socrates or Louise, because, I've written about this. I don't think they're both blameless I don't think they're both completely to blame by any stick. And actually Socrates and Louise have improved, I think, in the last the last couple of games we can say we've defended better. But they're not like absolutely solid gold at the moment. And,
Socrates had a low key bad game, by the way, if you watch it. Yeah, he got caught a couple of times, not looking that convincing, and that for me is the challenge. Because look, Callum Chambers is not going to be Arsenal's first choice right back. That's not going to happen. He could get some game time there. Bellerin's game time is going to have to be managed. There's still plenty of Europa League games. There's another round of the League Cup and things like that. There'll be a busy Christmas schedule, so there'll be minutes probably there for him. But the interesting thing for me is, let's say we start Bellerin against Sheffield United. I think that Emery will think about maybe playing Chambers in that right-handed, that right-sided centre-back spot. Not least because if Emery has some concerns over Bellerin physically, having a guy on the right centre-back who has had a few games at right-back, that's probably pretty good cover for Bellerin. That's probably pretty good. You could argue, you could spin that's a decent idea if you're worried about Bellerin's energy levels at this stage of his recovery. Just having a guy there who's played his position the last few weeks and kind of has a sense of what that job is. And so, I still don't think he's quite got the athleticism to play the position in the way that a club like Arsenal would really want it. But he's knocking on the door. He's really knocking on the door, along with. I was talking before the game about how wonderful is it that we've got like this big dilemma on the left wing between Martinelli and Saka, these two 18-year-olds. He was injured, unfortunately, but Reece Nelson as well. He had a good game in the week. And you're thinking, these kids are pushing. They're not just making up the numbers. They're pushing. And so's Chambers. And all credit to him. Yeah, and I think, by the way, you touch on an interesting point, too, which is, I was disappointed that we let Iwobi and Mkhitaryan go, although I saw the value in doing it. But had we not, Martinelli wouldn't be playing in the Premier League, and Saka wouldn't be playing in the Premier League, and Nelson wouldn't be playing in the Premier League. And maybe we'd be incrementally a tiny bit better if it was Mkhitaryan and Iwobi instead of Saka and Martinelli. I don't even know if that's the case. But it'd be so much worse for the club, in my opinion, for them not to get that chance to shine. So, these are growing pains that you go through. I think the interesting thing with Chambers, unlike Kolasinac, who's just been dire and will lose his place to Tierney, and that'll be the end of it. And to be fair to him, he's probably not a fullback either. He's a wingback. But with Chambers, does playing well at fullback earn you a right to become a center-back starter when Bellerin's back? And I think it'll be interesting to see that. You have a thought on that?
Because I'd add the games. He certainly played very well at Newcastle on the first game of the season at centre half. But you're right, playing well at right. But the thing is, though, I look at what he's done at right back, and I know this sounds weird because he's had a few assists recently. But for me, in this game, it was his defensive contribution that actually really stood out. Those were the big moments for him, and I think that might. Well, I think it will be in Emery's head anyway, but that if there's something that tips it in his favour, it might be that.
Yeah, and that's fair. And by the way, a guy who deserves credit for that too is Guendouzi, because last season we were all critical of him off the ball, and this season he's been magnificent. And I mentioned that Socrates had a bad game. He completely lost his man in the box at one point, and Guendouzi was alive to it, cut across him and cleared it. Otherwise, it's an easy slot home. So kudos to him. We have not heard nearly enough from Clive on this podcast, and unfortunately, we have to make our sponsor happy and go to that. So we're going to take a break and then come back with Clive with a couple of questions. So again, new sponsor, really sort of nervous about this, working with a big company, but I'm excited about it. So we're going to tell you about the Shmew. Again, it's theshmew.com, the SHMEW, the SHMEW.com. We'll take a break. We'll tell you about the Shmew. Do you Shmew? Let's find out. We'll come back after this. Okay, it's time to tell you about the Shmew, the craze that's been sweeping both sides of the Atlantic. They're asking, we Shmew, do you? It's time to find out if the Shmew is right for you. You can go to the Shmew right now. That's theshmew.com. Now, we need to clarify due to pending litigation that is the Shmew, SHMEW.com, not the Shmew, SCHMOO.com. That's obvious. But again, due to pending litigation, we need to clarify that. So right now, the folks at the Shmew want to get you signed up. And if they do, they are running a great campaign for October. Everybody who signs up in the month of October is eligible to get a free bottle of Drakkar Noir sent to you, postage paid. That's a free bottle of Drakkar Noir sent to you, postage paid. So it's time to go to theshmew.com, sign up, and find out if you Shmew. Now, of course, the Shmew is part of the Black River Conglomerate Industries, so they cannot send the Drakkar Noir to Croatia for reasons that should be obvious. But other than that, you are eligible. So go there now, theshmew.com, that's SCHMOO.com, theshmew, SCHMOO.com. Do it now. All right, we're back, and hope you enjoyed that, and a lot of information there certainly to process, and hopefully you'll be checking them out at theshmew.com. That, again, is the SCHMOO.com, the SCHMOO.com. So, Clive is back. Clive, sorry we haven't talked to you much today, but I'm glad that you are here nonetheless, because I can feel your presence and your intellect oozing through the microphone, which is good enough. Let's talk.
Guys are on form. They're really on form.
I don't know about that, but, it's kind of like Arsenal. We're winning, maybe, but it's not pretty. Let's talk Pepe for a second. It's funny, right? We sent out a guy in Iwobi who my principal complaint with him was good shuttler, good in possession, good ball progressor, no end product. The irony is Pepe was supposed to be the opposite, dynamic, hard driving end product machine. And the funny thing is he's actually been great at progressing the ball and getting it into the final third and has had no end product. Do you think that he is doing okay and maybe we're not seeing the things that he's providing enough, or that he's struggling? Where do you fall on this performance from Pepe and what we've seen from him so far?
There's always a context around this, but we're all desperate for him to be the player we want him to be. We've cleaned the house for him, and he's going to be our sort of next superstar, and that's where we're judging him on. When I look at this game, I thought he started the game really brightly. I really thought he got it, he pressed, when he popped it off, he changed lines really quickly, looking for combinations. And I thought for about 10, 15 minutes, I thought, there you go. He's had a bit of a wake up. He's realised that the light is shining on him. Let's see how long this goes. He has the curling shot, and then we score, and he's doing fine. But then it sort of fades. And I watched him. There was one clip in the second half when I think Aubameyang was breaking, and Pepe's on. He's almost like he runs on a train track. It might have actually been. I know where Tim sits. It might have been right in front of him, actually running towards the North Bank. Rather than come inside, he just runs in a straight line and doesn't look to connect. And I thought, we need to free him. I think he's playing in a hole on that right-hand side, and he's very reticent to come off of it. I'd like to see him be freer. The fact he doesn't feel he can be free tells me there's a little bit of a lack of what he's allowed to do within this team. In his previous team, he could go anywhere he liked. He knew his role, and if he decided to go into the middle, he went into the middle, and that was it. At the moment, I don't see that freedom he needs to try to read the game, to be available, to protect it, to move it. I just see him playing in a slot, playing on a train track, and I feel that's quite restrictive. And teams, they watch the YouTubes like we have done. They know when he receives in that right-hand slot, they generally know what he's going to do. So they try to keep on his right foot. And then when he does go inside, all he's got is a square pass, if at all. right? So he's limited. They're not going to let him shoot. So we're going to show you down one side. If you do get a shot, you've got to curl it around 14 people. It's got to go into the postage stamp. Very difficult. So the only way we need to free him. We also need to get some wall passes going with him. And I think the combination of a right back that's on his wavelength and a centre forward that doesn't mind a wall pass, I think that will free him creatively. I think on the ball, he has wonderful skill sets. We all know that. I'll be brutally honest with you. I think he needs to get into the gym a little bit. I think he's light. I think he's quick. He's not super quick. He's not devastatingly quick. This is the Premier League. Everyone's quick. He's quick. He's sharp. He's got sharp, fast feet. But he is not Aubameyang quick. He's just quick. And I think we mustn't overestimate this. He needs to work. He needs to work on his body. It's a different league. He needs to develop some lower body power. He needs to really start to use physicality. That's what's going to work for him. There are players like Saka, for example. I think Saka's stronger than him. He's got better power, more density. He uses his body. He rolls people.
I have density as well, just FYI.
He protects the ball. And I think Pepe's got some adaptation to do. But in every game, I remember him doing something which absolutely is beautiful technically. But in every game, I walk away thinking, oh man, when are you going to finally produce? You know, when's that curler going to go into the top corner? When's that cross going to land on someone's head, although he got an assist in this game? So I feel he's getting closer, but I think there's work to do. We may not see the best of him until maybe even next calendar year. I mean, that's how long I think it could take.
Well, but in the meantime, he can do things. I mean, I was looking at the stats review in Discord that Giant Gunner posts for patrons. Is really sensational. And he was one of our strongest pressing agents in this game. So, I mean, you know, he's involved. He's engaged. You know, he progressed the ball up the right wing. It's not there. And I think everything you said is accurate, Clive. But my question then to you is, what do you make of what's happening on the other side? Because there's really nothing over there. Kolasinac, I think, has just been told to give up the ghost and just sit back a little more because it's not happening for him. I mean, one of his rare forays forward was a really bad giveaway, a square pass in our final third that led to a counterattack. He got beat to the end line with a shot that Leno tipped over. Not a good game for him, and that's got to be impacting Saka. How do you feel Saka is doing, basically operating the left wing all on his own?
Yeah, he's doing fine. He's working two ways. He's trying to drive. He's trying to get onto the end of things. He's trying to come. He takes up very smart positions. Actually, he comes centrally, and Aubameyang goes left. That's very mature of somebody his age to do that. Just to find himself in centre forward positions. I've got zero worries about him playing 5 or 6 games. Take him out, rest him, play him, rest him. He has got great football intelligence, and he is used to the intensity of the British game, and he's got the muscles where he needs muscles to survive players like Ashley Young at Old Trafford quite easily. He's going to have a very big future again. I'm not worried about him. I am worried about the connectivity to him. I'm worried about how we bring the ball up to him. I think Ceballos is very difficult to play with. I think he is so free-spirited. I don't think we can get much structure from him. I think Kalashnik is also, he's a difficult person to play with. I don't think he's that easy to read. He bombs, and then he takes 15 minutes to get back, and so Xhaka goes into being an auxiliary fullback, and then he blows for 5 minutes while he has a rest and say 30 yards away from the winger he should be combining with. It's just where we are at the moment. There's a lot. I know we all know this, but there's a lot wrong with this group at the moment, and I think it's incredibly encouraging that if all these things are not working to their optimum, we're still managing to sneak some wins and accumulate some points.
Yes,
and I think we are. You know, what's really impressed me has been the last 2 or 3 games defensively. I think there's been a collective responsibility to defend our goal, and you know, while we're all focused on the detail of individuals, you know what I'm focused on, mate? I'm focused on how mentally and how defensively we imploded the last 2 months of last season. We need to fix that, because that is something, despite all these players coming back, there's a defensive mental fragility that really came to roost, which cost us 50 to 100 million pounds by not being in the Champions League, because we derailed defensively. We were brittle defensively. When the moment presented itself, we couldn't grab it. This is a classic game, Bournemouth, when the other teams lose and we then go and draw. Finally, we win and take advantage of a situation presented to us. And I think that's a minor step forward and something we need to hold on to, when it comes to the crucial months of April, May next year.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair. I just wonder, I know the statistics don't necessarily bear out that there's been a huge defensive improvement, and so we have to sort of interrogate at some level what it means to have been defensively sound against that Manchester United that didn't score at Newcastle and hardly created anything, and this Bournemouth, who, to be fair, can create some stuff, but did not in this game. And whenever that happens, you're always sort of torn between we were good or they were crap. By the way, one stat, and it's a new statistic that OptaPro or the OptaPro account tweeted it out. It's called positive possession value. And they rank each possession value and whether you have a positive contribution or not. And Nicolas Pepe has contributed the most positive possession value contributions per 90 to Arsenal this season. Some of this stuff starts to sound almost a little too dense to really parse it. But the fact that there are some statistics pointing to him positively contributing to what we're doing, I think is at least a good sign, because you don't want to say it's just totally not happening for him. And I don't think it would be fair to say it's totally not happening for him. I think, we've covered the midfield. I think Guendouzi has really stepped up and taken a leadership role. But Paul, I think there is a question for Ceballos as to what the role is that he's supposed to play. I loved him in a double pivot, in a more traditional 4-2-3-1 in midweek, and not so much in this sort of weird, wider 10, flat 3 role that he played in the league. So you look at the pass maps and you look at the pass networks and you look at the positioning on the pitch, and the one thing you keep coming back to is there is a huge gaping space in the middle of the pitch in advanced midfield. There's nobody operating there. Is it personnel or is it system? I mean, I don't think Ceballos fits that. It is. Look, let's face it. My tongue is stinging to mention Mesut Ozil, but it's pointless, as we said on the last podcast, because he's not coming back. It's just not going to happen. Is it Lacazette that's going to fill that role? How do we fix that space? And is that gap the gap that's going to unlock this attack at some level?
Well, certainly Lacazette. Well, if I look at our personnel, Lacazette is really the only guy who plays in and is comfortable in that area, even though he has a full-time job slightly further up the pitch.
I mean, there's no one to give the ball to there. Just nobody.
Yeah. Yeah, but if you think of, we get our fullbacks in and they're bombing forward, and our 2 inverted wingers pull towards the centre, and you got Lacazette in the middle, kind of false nining from time to time and then moving up. And, maybe Aubameyang is one of those guys coming in from the left, most likely, at that point. Then you're going to have more players push towards the middle into that zone. It's not a zone that Emery has looked to fill while he's been at Arsenal for the most part, apart from occasionally with Ramsey and occasionally with Ozil, with an actual player. His most searing formation in my mind from last year is the Iwobi, Mkhitaryan kind of dual 10s in the half spaces. He's just not obsessed by having a 10 in the middle. That's complemented by the fact that Ceballos, from whatever I've seen of his previous incarnations at his 2 previous clubs, he swings left. You can put him as a central midfielder. And I felt he was kind of in the 10 spot in this game. I think we actually had pretty much 2 pivots, but Ceballos' patterns from midfield into attack always have him swing over into that left pocket in the half space. That's where he likes to sit. So you're not quite sure what your formation is. He's not going to stay central. Guendouzi's touches are almost entirely on the right-hand side, and his passes are either back or up to the Pepe Chambers pocket. So we don't have anybody playing into the middle, and nobody connected with Aubameyang in this, which is probably why he was also swinging off to the wings and swapping with Saka just so he could see a bit of the ball. And I think Emery has... I'm tempted to think Emery has embarked on this season with a plan that's all based around these fullbacks showing up. And maybe I'm tempted on that because that's what we haven't seen. So you believe what you haven't seen because we don't like what we've seen so far. And when we have those fullbacks coming on stream, then the fact that we will attack down the wings and create our chances down the wings. I mean, even in the Liège game, all our attacks were down the left. Even with Martinelli in the centre, it was the Saka-Tierney show down the left where the creativity came. I think his idea of creativity is not central. It's down the wings, and we don't have the players yet. We maybe thought we could get there in the short term. I have sympathy for Emery coming into the season saying, well, we'll play out from the back. We'll play it up the sides through Maitland-Niles and Kolasinac till I get Bellerin and Tierney. But he's, Maitland-Niles has kind of gone backwards. Chambers, I agree, has been doing great, but he's still not that marauding right full back. And Kolasinac has been tasked with being a little bit more defensive. And when Saka's ahead of him, that's not the best combination on that side. So he may just be paddling for time, waiting to get past the interlull, I pray, and get at least one of his two fullbacks firing so that we can do more interesting things from the sides.
I have to admit, I am always torn between wanting to see the best of what something can be and feeling that it is not acceptable in football to always be pointing to a perfect situation in the future where everything will work. And by the way, I'm not saying that searingly or pointed.
I can only apologize.
No. I'm not saying it's all you got. I get it, right? Like, look, I am guilty of it. I look at how Cola plays, and I can't help but think Tierney's going to make all the difference. Lacazette's going to make all the difference. But I've seen this team with Lacazette not play well. I've seen this team with Bellerin play meh. We haven't seen really a proper left back, so I guess that's an encouraging thing. I don't want to pretend like there aren't reasons to think we could get better. I just also kind of wonder, I mean, Solskjaer is playing with a team that literally the quality of that squad is bottom quarter of the table. That's how bad it is right now. He's not getting a lot of cover for that, right? Does he deserve it? Maybe he does. Does Emery? I don't know. I think holding out for ideal situations for a team to play well I'm torn, because it is fair to say he needs those players back to play better. Absolutely, it's fair. I think it's also fair to say a manager shouldn't need the perfect storm to produce something that looks a little better. Because the funny thing is, he produces great football in midweek with a team that is far below the best team he could put out. Now, the irony, of course, is he had his first choice fullbacks this midweek, so put that to one side. Tim, I think, first of all, you were at the stadium, so let me just ask you this. That second half was soporific. I mean, you don't have to thrill me every time out. I get it. Would it be nice? Sure, it's entertainment. It should be fun. But like, how is the Emirates crowd reacting to the football they're being served in a winning game like that? Was there frustration? Was it just apathy? Take the temperature of the Emirates in terms of how the reaction was to that football.
I think there was a lot of apathy, and there were a lot of empty seats again. The part of that I do think is the horrific Thursday Sunday grind. It's difficult. Yeah, it's difficult to explain, but particularly when most of the season ticket holders don't live in London now. I live in London, and it was still a massive pain in the arse to get to the stadium on rail replacement buses and everything. But you endure those things if the football's good. And there was still a lot of empty seats again. And during the second half, it was honestly, I'm not sure I'd quite put it as apathy. I'd definitely put it as boredom. And you know what? Like honestly, absolutely honestly, this is going to sound like a joke, but when they put up 5 minutes stoppage time, usually my gut reaction 5 minutes of stoppage time at 1-0 would be, oh God, I hope we hang on. But absolutely honestly, my instinct was, oh God, not another 5 minutes of this.
I mean, it's fair.
I was just like, I was thinking I mentally checked out of this game probably about 20 minutes ago, and I want it to end so I can go to the pub and do something else. And I think there was a lot of that. There was just a point in the second half where I was thinking, it was, it's so silent that the silence hits you when you can hear like the generators buzzing in the stadium and stuff like that. You can hear the electricity, and you start to notice stuff like, I think I noticed that the floodlights weren't on in the last like 10 minutes, and I was a bit like, It's a little bit overcast today. Winter's coming, and all this stuff that you wouldn't notice if the game
if you were like watching the football.
Yeah. So there was a lot of that. But what you were just saying about like I guess sticking stuff on a tab for a better future and all of that, it just really struck a chord with me, because I literally this morning I went to this session on mindfulness and like handling stress and all of that, and this guy said,
welcome Tim.
And the guy that was running it said one of like the leading causes of stress is like it will be better when syndrome, so it's like I'm really stressed at the moment, but when I get promoted everything will be fine. When I get a pay rise everything will be fine. When I've saved up for a deposit and I buy that house everything will be fine. And you stick everything on a tab, and actually what it does is it kind of builds up your stresses and your resentments, because quite often when you get there you
don't get the payoff.
Built up. You've built up all this stress and resentment, and you can't see the wood for the trees. You've already got yourself into that mindset, and I feel like maybe we're setting ourselves up for a fall as well. I wrote something today about like how Bellerin and Tierney coming into the team could improve things. I don't think for 1 minute it will transform us. And we'll become a completely different team. I think there'll be some marginal gains there, which you'd expect. Like we haven't had our first choice fullbacks, now we've got them again. Of course, that's going to make things better. But I really, really feel like we're building up on that idea and obsessing on it, and I just feel like we're going to be disappointed. It's going to be like another down payment on the resentment tab. And when it perhaps doesn't all work out like we think, it's going to stress us again, because we're already getting stressed at Pepe. And, there's people doing mock-ups of him with Jovino's hair and stuff like this
it's
on Twitter. And
let me ask you something. Is it fair, as an Arsenal fan, with a pretty handsomely paid, expensively assembled squad, even with a few young players in? I mean, it's not like this is an all-kid lineup. Is it fair when Bournemouth show up at our stadium to expect that we put them to the sword a bit? That we, that especially when we get a goal in the first 10 minutes, that we go on and make it a fun day out? I mean, is it fair to have that expectation, or is that just sort of a spoiled attitude?
No, I think it's totally fair to have that expectation. Look at the kind of the inequalities in the Premier League. We're a cheap. Obviously we're always looking up at like Man City and teams like that. Although, albeit, I think Liverpool's recent success kind of perhaps puts that into a little bit of perspective. But we are vastly better off than the vast majority of teams. So and like you say, not every single game. And I've also had some conversations around this game that I've found frustrating, because like people have said to me, but we're being boring but effective. And I'm thinking, if that was the pattern of every, like, because this was a bit like the Newcastle game, right? The first game of the season, where we were pretty underwhelming, but we got it done 1-0. But on that day, you're like, well, we got injuries and we got players who've been away at international tournaments, and this was all just about the result. But I was thinking, but if every game was like this Bournemouth game, at least I'd think, well, this is what we're trying to do deliberately. We're trying to grind out 1-0s, and I'd be fine with that. But that is not how every game has gone. And in fact, quite a lot of the games haven't been boring because we've been a chaotic mess. The games have gone like one of two ways. We've been a complete chaotic mess, and they've been, we've either gone, we've either gone 2-0 up and blown it, or 2-0 down and got it back, or whatever. Or they've just been a bit soporific because we're the ones that have taken the lead and then just not built on it. And so it's difficult, like if we were trying to be boring but getting results, that would be completely different. I would honestly be fine with that. I really would. But I never got the sense that was what we were trying to do. And Bournemouth picked up the pace at the beginning of the second half, as you'd expect. I imagine they got a mouthful from Eddie Howe at halftime, and rightly so, because they were awful. So they were always going to do that. But then, like, we just stopped the pressing, and we stopped and we didn't have loads of intensity in the first half, but we had a good amount. And then we just stopped all that and kind of fell back in on ourselves. And I really don't understand what that is. And like you said earlier, Emery seems to intimate that's not what he told them to do, yet it's what they keep doing. So either he's, well, I don't want to say lying, that's too emotionally loaded a word. Either he's being, shall we say, liberal with the truth, or he's telling them to do stuff and they're not doing it.
Yeah.
And neither one of those things is good.
No, you know what I would say, Tim? I would say, to your point, if we were executing a boring plan brilliantly, then it's an aesthetic debate, because I may not love that, but that is certainly a way to win football games, and Jose Mourinho did it. And I'm not saying that's who I want managing the club, but it works. I don't think we are executing a boring plan effectively. I think we are simply not executing a plan. And that may sound harsh, but like, I don't think that second half was a half of football we controlled in a dull way. I think it was just a half of football that just happened. Clive, so let's, first of all, I want to get your take on this. I mean, let's get a little bit theoretical here. Let's look at the way we approach. You always talk about, it's just football and the way we approach football, and you tweeted something out, sort of like, hey, you take the points, you get on the bus, you go home. I love that we won. I would much rather we win than lose. The question is about sustainability. I had an interesting chat with someone on Discord, and I said, my first preference, like if I had to rank them in order, my first preference is win playing beautiful attacking football. My second preference is win playing good, solid defensive football. My third preference is win playing the worst football imaginable. And my fourth preference is any other result. But then I thought about it, Clive, and I said, you know what? Maybe above win playing terrible football would be drop points playing brilliant football. Because if you go play brilliant football every week, you're going to eventually pick up a lot of points and be a good team. Teams that play great football eventually start picking up points. So for you, what is the balance between wanting to say, hey, we're third, we have plenty of points, we're doing fine, don't worry about it, versus this isn't sustainable if we keep playing this way?
I don't think when we get everybody back, I think the excuses run out, and I think people are being polite right now when regarding the manager. Some people not polite.
Not everybody.
I think they were being polite last season, if I'm honest with you. This has been in the background. And the moment he dropped the ball at Watford, and obviously the end of last season, enough's enough for many people, and they stopped being polite, and they're now looking for reasons to put the hammer down, right? So when we didn't play well, there's no point in dressing up. We all know we lack cohesion, we lack connectivity. I started to think to myself, so what's happening here? So what is happening? What are we looking at? And I thought to myself, okay, who's the flagship of the club at the moment? It's probably Aubameyang, we'd all agree, yeah? He had 17 touches in this game, which means even though he's our most influential player from a goal-scoring perspective, he's not influential on build-up or playing style. Then I started to look around the rest of the team. We have some wallflowers in this team. We have Guendouzi just forcing himself stylistically on the group. We don't have any strong style players that dictate the style we want to play. So what people then do is they focus on the manager and say, what's his plan? What's his style? When I look back in history and I look at the players we used to have, they were so influential, they influenced the style that we played. We haven't got those players any longer. We have players who are, I don't want to use the word water. That's not the right phrase. But we have players who are good next to other influencers. The most influential player this season from a stylistic point of view is probably Guendouzi. I think Lacazette is a player that influences how we play because he's central. He's like a pillar. Solidifying David Luiz last couple of games, I can see his influence growing. The goalkeeper influence shutting the back door is growing. I think what excites us about Tierney is we see he could be really influential. His style is quite dominant. We can see that he can influence. That's what we're excited about. He can dictate. He knows how he wants to play. He's confident. And if he gets up to the speed of the Premier League, he's going to influence us. And I feel we've lost some influential players stylistically. And I think it's affecting how we're looking at the game. So we have Ceballos. He's a high-touch player, but he's not massively influential. We have Xhaka, who's influential in a negative way. not in a positive way. You know, we have Willock, Trier, youngster on his way up. Saka, Trier, youngster on his way up. Martinelli, youngster on his way up. There isn't the influence there that we were used to. And that's what we're all begging for with these 4 players to come back in. We're hoping their style is going to influence this group. And then we can develop a style from within it. And I think that's what I'm seeing right now. And if you add another thing into the mix, I do feel Premiership Saturdays are becoming almost like World Cup quarterfinals. The pressure of these games is influencing the team's confidence in a negative way. It's quite interesting that the other cup games, they feel nice. They feel nice to watch. You know why? The pressure of outcome of the Premier League and finishing the top 4 isn't there.
Just say it. You want to stay in the Europa League, Clive. It's fine.
Well, the Europa League and the League Cup, it's not only the players that we're seeing, because some of them are quite similar, right? Some of them are quite similar to the first team. We just mix and match. But it's the whole aura about the occasion is different. It feels more relaxed. It feels different. The players look more relaxed. They look more comfortable in those arenas. And this is why I always go on about, you know, I know I'm being idealistic, but I talk about serenity around the club. I think it's important to create an environment where these players feel relaxed on every occasion and not just on League Cup and Europa League occasions where we feel it doesn't matter as much, because we are so keyed up as fans to reach the Champions League. Everything that goes wrong on those league games is like the end of the world. It's like, it's got to happen. It's got to happen now. What we're really doing is imparting our own stress about how we feel about how big a Premiership game is onto the team, onto the environment. And I feel the whole thing is becoming a negative. And when I look at the players, who has got the influential personality to lift us out of this? And I don't see many. I saw at the weekend Aubameyang look quite down with 2 18-year-olds next to him, missing his mate Lacazette, missing his mate to share the influence, to share the pressure.
Strikers like that need to be brought into a game, though. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think he can do it himself.
Oh, no, he can't. It's not a blame.
You don't want him to, right? You don't want him running deep into the midfield and things like that.
But he's helping out because he can see the weaknesses, running back, making tackles. And Pepe, the player that we're hoping to be his partner, I think he passed through him once in this game. Tobias passed through him twice. So what's happening? How can he have a good game? They're the 2 players that we're expecting to connect with him. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So we're lacking a bit of personality and influence, and I think that's what we're hoping for with the big 4 coming back in. Whenever they do come back in, we're hoping they bring that to the group.
And look, let's be honest, sometimes in football, you need something to break your way, and by breaking your way, it can unlock something. Pepe was fouled in the box. That's a penalty. I mean, that is a penalty. And if we get it, and maybe Pepe takes it and slots it away, his second goal of the season, we go 2-0 up, the game changes. I mean, maybe that's the thing that unlocks us and has us playing with some freedom. But again, I'm not sure that it's mentality. You know, there's a part of me that was thinking Emery doesn't want us to attack, but he's saying very clearly he wants us to control games with possession and attack more. He's saying it. So I look and I say, why aren't we doing it? And I really think the middle of the pitch is the problem. I look at the double pivot with a 10 in midweek and the way it worked, and I look at this flat 3 with those midfielders splitting wide, Xhaka on an island. Look at Xhaka's pass map. If you go on the Discord and look at the passing networks and the maps that Giant Gooner posted, Xhaka's passes were all lateral. He had no one to pass to vertically. No one. It was wide to Guendouzi or wide to Kolasinac, who was planted on the halfway line, and there's no verticality. There is no one to give that ball to in the center of the pitch to turn and slide it into Aubameyang or get it into the fullbacks, cutting into the channels. The fullbacks are, Saka and Pepe can both take the ball, get the ball 2 feet and run with it. But they both have the ability to run onto it, and neither of them are getting the opportunity to do that because there's no one to create that kind of pass. So to me, I am starting to flip from thinking that Emery doesn't want to play attacking football to thinking that Emery needs to tweak that midfield system and the spacing and distances of players, like you said, Clive. I look around the pitch. There's one player with the ball at his feet, and often there is no player within 3 yards of him, or there's one, but there isn't that triangle. You can't play their way around pressure, and the ball goes laterally or goes back. So I think the system is going to make a difference. Maybe having those fullbacks will lead to him feeling more confident, pushing them up. I mean, that's just something we're going to have to find out. But I think unlocking the midfield is a big part of it. Paul, I want to start to wrap up, and I want to get your take on the philosophical argument here. So, I have people in my mentions that accuse me of moaning on Twitter. Heaven forbid. And yeah, okay, I do. I didn't like the game. I watched Arsenal and it sucked. But we won, and that's good. And there's this perception that, if you win, you must be happy. End of story, only thing. Am I happy we won? Yes. So, I would flip it on its head. The same people that say, if it's a win, you can only respond to it happily. I would say, well, then by that measure, if it's a loss, you can only respond to it angrily. But that's not what's happening. So to me, it just seems like the rules are never be critical, never be disappointed. And my attitude, Paul, is I can look at this game, be thrilled that we won, laugh at United, laugh at Spurs, have a Schadenfreude pod on Tuesday because of it, thank God, but also very fairly walk away from this game being like, well, that sucked, and now it's 2 weeks without Arsenal, and I got to live with that in my mind. Are you allowed to want exciting football that thrills you and have criticisms of a game like this, or is that asking too much?
Well, we all come to football to fix some problem in our lives, right?
So many problems, yes.
Yeah. And a game like that didn't fix many problems for most people, apart from those people who needed 3 points and a win. So I guess, to be fair, it was a dire performance that what you can say is we were very good not to completely tear into the team for, because any other result.
That's a great point. If this had ended 1-1, if Callum Wilson rounds the keeper and instead of trying to slot it across, slots at home, and the performance was exactly the same, but the outcome was 1-1, you think that this would have been met with the same amount of circumspection?
Yeah. So, no, I don't.
Right.
So, to those who say, well, why aren't you happy about the 3 points? Well, we balance that against how frustrating this performance, not in this game, but in this pattern of games, and where is it going to take us? You do. While Tim talks about the meditative process and not looking too far into the future, there's this whole Buddhist thing about living in the moment, and that's what it's about, which is when you look at the future, that's where anxiety comes from and worry comes from. And you did ask about philosophy here. That's great if you have no control and no say in it. So there are those fans whose philosophy is, I'm powerless, I have no say in it, I'm just going to take what it is and make the most of it, because that's how they cope with stress. And then there are other people who cope with the stresses in their lives by feeling they have some role in it. And it's very frustrating for fans because they feel they have some role. We start talking about the window for buying players or the formations, etc. But we have no impact on it. The only little bit of impact you have is if they can hear you through your TV, or if your shout in the stadium is significantly different to what the crowd is shouting. So it's this incredibly frustrating process fans go through when things aren't going well. And for most teams, they aren't going well most of the time. Here, we get a win, but we know there's trouble brewing here, that we won't be able to sustain this over a season, and that things need to change. And, depending on how big your fingers are while you're crossing them here, we're crossing our fingers that when the interlull comes along here, when we get Tierney back, when we get Bellerin in, that something will, maybe not magically, but substantially change. I do think, to Clive's point, that Tierney's style of play, if he can bring what he's supposed to bring, what he brought in the Standard Liège game, is one of those guys who will bring a personality onto the pitch. He, for a young guy, is a very big personality, and he may be one of those leaders in terms of how we impress ourselves on the pitch that we're looking for. Because I fully agree that we don't have those players. You put Vieira on a pitch, you put Henry on a pitch, you put Bergkamp on a pitch, a team starts to have a personality and style from what those players impart on the pitch. Ozil's one of those players when he has touches, but he's had a lot of games where he's actually been a low touch count kind of guy. Ceballos was actually pretty busy in this game, but guess who had the most touches in this game? Just by some large measure, and that was Chambers.
Yeah.
Which is great for Callum, but probably tells you something about just how wonky this game was, because he was not he did very well, but he's never going to be the cutting edge on the attacking end of this game. So when we're that dominant on that side, yet Sabalas is on the other side, this was all just wonky. It didn't feel right. It didn't look right. We had a good first half in terms of taking the initiative and pressing, and then we just stepped off in the second half and we hung on for dear life. So I think you have a right to be
and I mean,
perturbed.
You could say, look, we desperately need a goal scorer back. We need Lacazette. We need someone other than Aubameyang who can score goals, and thankfully it was Luiz in this game. I would say the Lacazette miss is a big one because we need someone who can occupy the ball in that center space in the final third, but we need to just create more chances, plain and simple. And Tim, as we finish up here, look, it's great that we have 15 points and that we're third in the table, a point behind City. We're also 3 points above West Ham, right? We're 1 point above Crystal Palace. The table at this point in the season is kind of not the point, right? I think, at the end of the season, if you're playing terrible football and you're 1 point up in first place, you don't give a shit, right? But if you're playing pretty bad football 8 games in, we're 1 point off second. I guess, what's the statistic? I think we're the same amount of points off first as we are off the relegation zone, right? So it's kind of a clusterfuck right now. So for you, does that positioning in the table matter to you right now? I mean, do you care about where we sit, or do you care more about the sort of process of getting there?
I'd say the latter. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's nice because that's largely where we want to be at the end of the season, if we're realistic enough to acknowledge that we won't finish first and probably not second either. But at this stage, it's not huge for the reasons you mentioned. There haven't been enough fixtures yet. The table hasn't really sorted itself out. There's a lot of compression and congestion in there. I don't think it really starts to take on, really, I don't even really look at it until Christmas, to be honest. I think the only reason we're looking at it now is because there's an international break, and it's like a natural bookmark in the season that we go, so where are we? Because before this game, I couldn't have told you where we were in the table. I knew we weren't bottom or anything, but I knew we weren't top. But I couldn't have told you if we were 8th, 6th, 10th, whatever. So we look at it quite naturally now because we've come to kind of a natural pause. But I'd rather be there than not. But I think at this stage, I think this may be slightly repeating something that James and Andrew were talking about in the Askcast Extra. This is the stage of the season where there's a lot of football to play, so you look for performances. Whereas when you get to March, April, I remember some dodgy 1-0 wins at Highbury when we were winning leagues and stuff like that. I remember a couple of games against the likes of Derby, where we just squeezed out a 1-0 and it was April and no one cared that it wasn't great. But at this stage of the season, there's just so much football to play, and there's so much to do that it is kind of more the performance. Nevertheless, I suppose that what that shows you is that we're, not just in with an excellent shot at the top 4. We were given at least a partially open goal at it last season, and we blew it. We've got an even better run up to it this year, and I really think as a club we are in better shape than Manchester United, than Chelsea, than Tottenham. I think we didn't sort all of our issues in the summer, but we sorted a lot more than I thought we would. We got a lot more work done than I thought we would, and I really like the kind of the executive direction of the club so far. I'm quite enthused by what some of the guys did behind the scenes, and I look at this squad and it's not perfect and it's still quite unbalanced and there are issues, but I think it's so much better than it was last year. We're talking about how much of a difference with the likes of Mkhitaryan and Iwobi have made. I'll be honest, I don't think that have made any difference at all compared to what we've got. I think what we've got out of the likes of Saka and Martinelli and Nelson and don't get me wrong, a lot of that's been in the cups, but just far better, because the cups were awful last year. Those early rounds of the Carabao Cup were dreadful last year. The Europa League group stage was dreadful. At least we've made that exciting. So yeah, I think we're in a better position than I thought we were going to be in June, and really I think there's a lot of pressure on the manager, and I've come round to the idea that even if he gets the top 4, that might not even be enough to save his job in the medium term. I think the way we do it might be a factor, and I think we've got to see a bit more, because if we sneak in, say, like, I don't know, on goal difference on the final day or something, I mean, we'd all take that, obviously. I'd be delighted with that. But at the same time, you'd probably come away and think, these teams like Chelsea's transfer ban isn't going to last forever. Tottenham will change things up. United, they've got all the money in the world. Like, these situations that those teams are in, and one or two of them might last for a bit, but they're not all going to last forever. This is, it's not quite the Leicester season again, but in terms of the top 4, it kind of is. And so I do think that there's pressure on Emery anyway, not just to get in the top 4, but to show that he can build on that.
Yeah, and by the way, I think the Leicester season is a relevant one to mention, because I remember when the Arsene wars were raging, the people that were still behind Arsene pointed to the Leicester season and said, how can you want him out? He just finished second. It's our best finish since the Invincible season. But clearly there was another argument, which was it was a massive failure. We were into the last part of the year competing with only Leicester for the title. We had beaten them at ours, and we blew it. And that is an absolutely perfectly reasonable conclusion. And the people that said, well, but we finished second, were sort of doing that out of context, right? And I think that some of where we are right now, if we were playing the football we were playing right now, and Spurs, Chelsea, and United were all on fire, and we were sitting 6th, I don't think anybody would be saying everything's fine. I think the fact that Spurs are a dumpster fire and United are even worse, and Chelsea got off to a slow start, although admittedly have started to pick it up, has allowed us to be in 3rd position at this point, and that makes us feel pretty decent about things. And that's not to say we shouldn't feel decent. It's just to say that we're using the table to measure how you're doing is an inherently extrinsic evaluator, which is fine at the end of the season. But in the middle of the season, it's not very useful to tell you how you're playing. So, Clive, I think it is fair to say I have worries about how we're playing. I'm thrilled that we won. I'm thrilled with our position right now, that it has to improve, that we can see some reasons why it might improve, right? Lacazette coming back, Tierney coming back, Bellerin coming back, and that hopefully all those things will result in that. And that's great. So let me ask you just a lighthearted question real quickly. Tim tweeted something that I thought was kind of funny. He said, right now I'm enjoying Spurs play more than I'm enjoying Arsenal. How much, you could take this as a serious question or a silly question. How much is the fact that United and Spurs are the best entertainment on television right now as they melt down, best entertainment, wherever you watch it, as they melt down on social media? I mean, who was it? Alan Shearer literally on the BBC said United are fucked, which is hilarious. If you haven't seen that clip, catch it. How much do you think that's contributing to the fact that some of the angst and some of the infighting, not all of it, it'll never go away, and some of the sort of internecine warfare, how do you say it? Internecine? Schadenfreude. How much of that stuff do you think is being eased by the fact that we're just sort of watching an epic meltdown from some of our rivals?
Yeah, the ones that are melting down, I worry about them bouncing back. The ones that are on top form, I think they won't sustain that. Leicester are the darlings at the moment. Won't be sustained, mate. One injury up front and they're done. They've got no depth there. Manchester United will turn into Manchester United. You are underestimating
the power of Vardy's PEDs, just FYI.
Yeah. Manchester United are Manchester United. Eventually they'll wake up. It won't be in time. They're missing their Lacazette and Martial, and since he's gone out, they're falling apart. We've lost our Lacazette and we've managed to accumulate points in the best part, so that's a good sign. Spurs' situation has been in the post for a couple of years because they didn't pay their players appropriately when they should have done, and Harry Kane playing that Champions League final and the other bits we know about has split the dressing room entirely, and so people are now thinking about their careers and their final free transfer at the age of 30 to miss out, to recollect the money that they missed out for the last couple of years while they were enticed by the opening of the stadium. The stadium opened a year late. Stadium's now open. They're not that impressed anymore. They want to move on and look after their families. So that's them done. Chelsea are the darlings at the moment, as I heard earlier on today, but also I know myself. Basically, their lone players have come back in, and they're now all in the England team. So Chelsea will now be the new Spurs. They'll have half the England team, and everybody will love them, even though they've let so many young players' careers be ruined because they haven't given them the chance appropriately or loaned them and sold them. But now all of a sudden they're the darlings of the country and have all the best youth players. I'm not buying that. It will last up to a point, the feel-good factor, but it will catch them up. And there's Arsenal. So many things wrong. Yet we're still there hanging around like a bad smell. When we do get it right, we have so much room for growth. So much room for growth. We are talking about 18 to 20-year-olds. They will be different in a month's time, let alone anything else. They will be better every minute that they have. And when we get our more influential players back in alongside them, I think there's room for growth and no room for excuses. I feel we lack something in centre midfield to make us a little bit more athletic. Whether we'll do that in January, I'm not so sure. But that will be the one thing I would potentially look to do, just so we can go with the running teams that want to run us. Apart from that, I'm willing to go on the journey with this group.
I mean, I'm willing to go on the journey with the group. Whether I'm willing to go on it with the manager, I don't know what to say. I kind of don't know.
I honestly feel, I will say this, I honestly feel we focus on the manager in a way that we don't need to focus on him with that level. I think the club is directionally taking things away from the manager. The manager's role is far less than it used to be. Hence, I try not to talk about him. I talk about the team, because everything around the manager is subjective, because we don't really know about the new control structure and what's really happening and who is driving things. And so, what I can talk about is the team, how they're constructed, what they're doing. And if people want to link that back to the manager, that's up to them. But my feeling is the manager's role is far more transient, far more, and I don't worry about him. I worry about Arsene Wenger going, because I knew we had nothing else behind him. Nothing at all. Now we have a lot of things going on in the club. If the manager goes, so be it. What's interested to me is I wonder what direction we'll take next. And I find that really exciting, because that may tell us who we want to be.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be so interesting, because with the Cronkies in full ownership, the game has changed. And it'll be interesting to see what direction they want to go in.
Yeah, and to be fair, I think the only reason for the excessive focus on the manager is, I think, to be fair to the fan base, there's a lot of confidence in the players, in the group that we've assembled, and there's sort of a belief among some people that they could be playing better. But let's see what happens when we get the whole group back. We're going to finish with a yes/no question. Paul, Manchester United, will they go down?
No.
Tim?
They'll go down, but their stats will stay up.
Tim?
Yes, because that will make excellent content.
Clive?
I'm old enough to remember the last time they did go down, and it was funny then.
I mean, I'm not kidding. I think they're going down. Okay, well, enough of that. Look, I hope you enjoyed this. I think it is a really big challenge to take a game that, like I said at the beginning of the pod, it's kind of a nothing game. And there's a part of you that's just kind of like, well, maybe we should just say Arsenal won and skip this pod and do another one. But I think we teased it out long enough to 90 minutes. So that's a testament to our verbosity. And I appreciate that. Appreciate that about all of you. So Paul's on Twitter at PausMyPants. Thanks, Pause. Woohoo. Tim's on Twitter at Stillberto. Thanks, Tim.
My pleasure as always.
Clive's on Twitter at ClivePFC. Thanks, Clive.
Thank you very much.
Schadenfreude. Schadenfreude.
It's not Swedish.
Schadenfreude? We're doing one of those tomorrow for patrons. We've got the stats review up in Discord. We got lots going on, and of course, please, because we are just very fortunate when we get the attention of the big wigs like the Shmew. So if you can go to the Shmew.com, the THESH SHMEW, the Shmew, THESHMEW, the Shmew.com. And do you Shmew? Let's find out. Go there now. So, all right, we're going to say goodbye, but we will come back with a lot more pods. We'll have pods throughout the interlull to keep you busy, or just, take your mind off the fact that you're doing dishes or exercising or whatever it is. So, who do we play next? Sheffield United?
Yep.
Let's try this again. Yeah, why not? We love you. Give us a 5-star review. Talk to you after Arsenal 10, Sheffield 0.